Welcome to Journaling with Nature, the podcast for those who want to turn curiosity into wonder, a pencil sketch into a rabbit hole of discovery, a moment of stillness into a life full of joy. I'm your host, Bethan Burton. Let's open the pages of our nature journals and explore this world together. Hello, this is episode 69. We are coming to the end of this year, and I don't know about you, but I'm really feeling it. It's not just that the days are flying off the calendar, but I feel it and I see it in people around me. It seems like everybody's tired from another long year. Everybody seems to need extra rest, extra care, extra kindness, and maybe some stillness. It's a time for slowing down, reading a book, curling up on the couch, or swinging in a hammock if you happen to live in a warm place like I do. I'm very much looking forward to spending some time in a hammock over the coming weeks. So because we're all in need of a little downtime, I'm very happy to bring you this reflective and restful conversation with today's guest, Susanne Thompson. Susanne is a nature photographer who planted the first seeds for her current work when she began taking a daily nature walk with her camera, taking in the details of this familiar route, noticing new wonders in nature around her, and letting it be a balm for her heart during a difficult period in life. One of the things we touch on in our conversation is the idea of stillness. Not stillness as in keeping the body still, but stillness within us, being present, being with this moment. It's that special kind of focus and engagement with whatever we're connecting with right now. Presence, you might say. Susanne finds this stillness in the nature walks she takes with her camera, and she explains all about her personal experience of nature connection during our chat. Let's listen. Susanne, thank you so much for being here with me. I am so looking forward to this chat.
I am really looking forward to it too, Bethan. I feel like I've gotten to know you just a tiny bit through your posts and through your podcast, and it's just a delight and an honor, and I'm just very excited to be here. Thank you.
So as you know, I always go back, and I'd love for you to tell me about nature connection in your early life. And I wonder if this awareness and attention on nature and the natural world has its beginnings in your childhood.
That would be a yes and a no.
Mm-hmm.
The yes, nature, absolutely. The attention part is where the no comes in, so you'll hear that. But absolutely nature. My mother loved nature. And when I was a child, we had a cabin that my great-grandfather on my father's side had built. And so our family owned that. And we would go to that cabin from spring through fall for a long weekend or 2 weeks, and just throughout the summer and throughout the seasons. And so there was a creek, and it was in a particular area in Ohio, which is in the Midwest of the United States. And there was something geologically about that area, and I can't articulate it, but there's a number of fossils in the rocks. And
Wow.
so I remember just being so intrigued, and they were large rocks. And even our fireplace was made out of these. And so I would just stand there and look at these. And my mom would take us on nature walks, and her father loved nature. And so he would take her through walks every Sunday out west in Oregon, which is in the northwest of the United States. And she learned the names of plants and things like that. And so she would take me and my brother on similar types of walks. And we would make nature bowls and just be out in nature. And so unfortunately, I didn't pick up on remembering the names of things. But yes, it was just very, very much a part of my childhood. And I think that took a deep, deep root, and I can reflect on it now as an adult. And we had a lot of freedom also to go out and play. And there were no distractions. There was no telephone. There was no television at the cabin. And There were 3 little lakes that I called my magic lakes, and I'd get up early in the morning and go down to my magic lakes, and, so we owned that cabin until I was 10, and so very much, a part of my childhood and just the running and exploring and being in it and having to create and play and, come in for dinner.
That sounds like an absolutely magical wilderness experience and
It
something
was.
that yeah, that sunk deeply inside you that you carry with you now.
Yes, it very much so was, and it was also, a balm in a sense. There were other
Mhm,
things going on at the time, and so it was kind of the almost an escape in a way. We would go there
mm,
and things were just seemed right, and, so I think I associate nature a lot that way
mm,
too, when things are hard or
yes.
whatever. I think that part certainly plays in now as well, so.
I'm so interested to hear about nature where you are. So, what nature looks like when you step outside your door? What sort of things do you see?
Well, right now it's as we're recording, it's winter, almost winter. I guess
Mhm,
December 21st it will be,
mm,
um, but we are in an area of I live in Georgia, which is in the southeastern part of the United States. So for those in other countries, we're north of Florida. Many people have heard of Florida.
mhm, mhm,
The mountains are about an hour to an hour and a half away, but we're at the Piedmont, which means that we're kind of at the foothills. We have a lot of deciduous trees, but also a lot of evergreens. Though where we live, we are within the city of Atlanta, which is a major international city. Um, we're not downtown, but we are in a very high residential area. And so it's, house upon house upon house upon house. And so while there are many trees in our area and there is lots of nature, it's also not like I'm out in farmland or
mm,
in the mountains or something like that. But many trees now have had the leaves fall, though some of the maples are still quite red. And what I'm noticing right out in my own yard is we have several pine trees, and our yard is covered in orangish brown pine needles, but
Oh, wow.
and many many pine cones, which are great for fire starters. So in the fireplace, not outside. So yeah, there is a lot of green though. I feel very fortunate that we have a lot around here.
I I love that because I think that wildlife and wildness in the suburbs is something that's very real and very rich and good to remember that amazing things happen in the suburbs.
Yeah, that it's funny because there were so many things I didn't see
Mm,
for many many years, and particularly right where I lived, and
mm,
until 6 or 7 years ago, I just didn't see it.
mm.
And when I started photographing it and looking for it, people would say, "Wow, you must live in a really pretty area." And I would start laughing, and I'm thankful for it, and it's pretty, but it was just a flower at somebody's mailbox. But,
Yes.
close, so you do have to look for it, and
Yes.
then when you start looking for it, it's like, "How did I miss this all these years? These bluebirds
Yeah.
didn't just show up," So
That's the
you're right.
amazing thing. That's the amazing thing about switching ourselves on in a way, switching ourselves on to nature. And then you can't switch it off, I think. Once you start looking your eyes
Right.
in and you start seeing things around you everywhere.
Yeah, I agree, and I've had some friends that know me and have known me and have known that I've always loved nature, and yet when I say that the first time I noticed a bluebird was
Mm,
6 or
mm,
7 years ago,
mm,
it's
mm.
a pretty common bird, or a hummingbird. I mean, I can date it back to the photograph when I first started seeing them, but I just wasn't looking, even
Yes.
though simultaneously we would go hiking as a family, and I would have some of the first words out of my mouth, if somebody had said, "What do you enjoy?" Among the things I would have said early on would have been nature. So there's a difference, I think, even in enjoying nature or finding calm in nature and taking time to observe nature and see what's right there. And yes, I agree. You do have to look for it
Mm.
sometimes,
Mm.
but yeah, it shows up.
Mm. And so you alluded to it a little bit, and I'd love to talk about it further, which is that about 7 years ago, you started taking daily walks around your home and documenting nature with your camera. Can you tell the story of how this very special routine started?
Absolutely. I'll take it the story actually begins a little further back,
Mm.
besides just the lifelong love of nature. But I have a very good friend who had seen a creative side and one that likes to express creatively. And that certainly came out in terms of as we raised our children, my husband and I. And I was teaching second grade at the time. And so the types of things I brought to the classroom, but a lot of that creativity was to produce something, like whether
Mm.
it was a memory or an event or a class lesson or something like that. And so she wanted to encourage it to come out in other ways. And so whenever there was a birthday or a holiday, she would give me watercolors, watercolor pencils, colored pencils, micron pens, and I enjoyed them. And I had done art earlier, somewhat playing with it. Um, but I didn't ever latch onto it. And one year, she gave our family, and I will put that in air quotes because it was really for me. But she gave us a camera,
Mm.
and
Wow.
honestly, at first, I used it to photograph our kids' soccer games, um, swim meets, things like that, and that was great. But then back in 2013, I entered into a time of a very deep grief. And my mom passed away, and there was a lot of loss in various relationships and in communities and things I was in. And this triggered some very, very deep things in me
Mm.
from my childhood. And I didn't know how to handle it, and I didn't know how to put words to it. All I couldn't even put the word grief to it necessarily.
Mm.
And so in 2014, in the summer when I wasn't teaching, I decided to go on a walk every day. And I just said, I need to see God. I know you're there, but I need to see you. And so I picked up the camera and I started walking the same route every day and photographing. And Beth, and it was like somebody turned on a light.
Mm.
and and all of a sudden I just started seeing, you know, flowers at the mailbox like I alluded to,
Yes.
and that bird and um that different kind of bird, and what is that bird and what is that flower. And then what started happening was I as I walked that same route, then the seasons changed. And of
Mm.
course, I knew that things happen when seasons change. But when you walk the same route and when you photograph it and you internalize it and you post it or comment on it or
Mm.
anything,
Mm.
you start developing a relationship with it and you start seeing how it changes. And it's not just an intellectual, yes, the leaves fall in the autumn in Georgia. um, um, but that to even observe the same tree over the course of seasons and then to
Yes.
have see the flowers that are blooming on that Japanese magnolia and the
Mm.
nest that was built there. And then when the leaves fall, you can see the structure of the nest. And then wondering the next spring, will birds return to that? Do birds return to their nest for that kind of bird? And then you start asking questions. And then you get an interest in science because then you want to learn
Mm.
more about it.
Mm.
And I just started seeing so many things and started developing a relationship with them in the sense of remembering where I photographed that tree or remembering a conversation. And pretty early on, it became so beautifully overwhelming of all that I
Mm.
was seeing that I had to pick a color. So I would say, okay, today I'm just going to photograph pink
Oh,
because,
wow.
and today I'm going to photograph, pick a color, because it got so that these walks, though they were the same walk, got longer and longer. And length of time wise, and I was taking more and more photos. And I had a very funny story one time where I realized what was happening, and I saw somebody and didn't know her, and she said, "Oh, what are you photographing?" And it was like she snapped me out of my zone, I guess. And I said, "Oh, yellow."
Oh,
And
wow.
she literally like backed away.
Mm.
And she said, "I thought you were going to say you'd seen a bird or something." And I realized just how strange my answer sounded to her. So I thought, next time somebody asks me something, just make something up besides the color. But anyway, so it 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 just grew and grew.
Mm.
And I know many people say the thing about photography is it's very instant, and it is, and I think that's something that I enjoyed about it in one sense. But for me, what it's become, I can remember the stories behind it.
Yes.
And um, the other thing that started happening really quickly is I would download them or upload them or whatever to edit them, and then I would crop it, and then on the screen, I would see things that probably my eye had seen, but I hadn't realized it. I
Yes.
couldn't take it in. I hadn't really observed it. And then it became so fascinating. And I saw it initially enough to want to photograph it. And then when it's on the screen, and then I'm zooming in, like, oh
Yes.
my gosh, and the patterns of the seeds and the sunflower. And, it just, and in fact, a few years later, I posted that a particular sunflower that I have in mind when I
Mm.
had that realization. And
Mm.
somebody said, "Oh, the Fibonacci sequence." And I'm like, "The what?" And then realizing that's the pattern that the
Yes.
seeds are in. And it's just so fascinating. So it's one thing leads to the next. But yeah, but that was how it began, and it just hasn't stopped. But I don't just walk the same route, though I
Mm-mm.
still walk that route a lot, and even find myself knowing that I'm coming up to a tree or a mailbox or something and looking to see what's happening, because I
Yes.
remember a photo from 4 or 5 years ago that I took
'Cause
there.
you know that you know all the details of that particular
Mhm.
route. I'm thinking of a couple of things you said in blog posts about this particular route, this particular time, and one thing was about seeing God in the details. And I love that way you phrased it, and I wonder if you could articulate about that, God in the details.
Yes. That's a really good question. Everything is connected.
Mm.
And I think that the thing that I love about science is it gives us a mode of exploration and a language to begin to understand it. And I'm saying all of that, and with the preface that I don't have much science background, so it's not
Mm.
like I can articulate that further. But for me, God in the details is, I do believe that it was created. The specifics and all of that, I don't know, in terms of minute details and etc. But the fact that there is pollination and that there are seasons, and if you remove one thing, then the what's the word I'm looking for? The effect that
Mm.
goes on all the way down, whether it's the food chain or life cycles or anything. And it, it was all so created. And then the beauty and the design, and we were created for beauty also, and to enjoy beauty and to see beauty. And so I'm seeing that because that cloud formation is just phenomenal. And those plants and the fact that you have some plants that are different than I do, and yet zucchini grows in both places. And there are 1,200 forms of melons and watermelons around the world. And so they're varied and they're different, and yet there's similarities. And from the, it's that all of these beautiful, beautiful details that were created, and then we get to explore it, and we're part of that, and we're part of the details, and just that beauty and people groups and nationalities and traditions. And we have the same longing and desire for love and all of that, and yet we also have these wonderful differences in cultures that are beautiful, and so again, that's in the details, and that's part of nature. And it just, I don't know. I mean, it's a very big question you just asked, and I could go on for a very long time. But it's related to nature for me, and it's related to many, many things, and for me to have an appreciation of different cultures and different plants, and the fact that there are different kinds of hummingbirds all over the world, and it's all connected, and yet you know God is so vast and creative that he didn't have to just make one kind of hummingbird, or one season, or one type of plant. So the more you learn, the more you learn, and the deeper that goes.
Mm, mm. I don't have a religious faith, but I look at nature and it blows my mind, and
Mhm.
I feel that's all I can say about that.
Mhm. Yeah, and yeah, I think
Um,
we're all drawn to that,
mm,
like,
mm,
and you can feel the very same things that I do, and sense of awe or wonder, or
mm,
I hear you talk about wonder and curiosity, and
mm.
yeah, yeah, I agree.
Well, another thing you said in a blog post is that when you went out each time for your walk, you would ask the question, "What do you want me to see today?" And I thought that was a really sweet and powerful thing to set like an intention as you walked out the door.
Mhm. Yeah, that's very much part of it, because there's a lot to see, and I think that we need to, you know, have a mindset of going out to see, but then again, there's that wonder, like, what am I to see what does today hold?
Mhm,
What
mhm.
what am I to see today? And wow, what am I going to respond to today? And what else is there that I've never seen? Whether I'm in a brand new place or I'm in that same walking route.
Mm, mm.
So yeah, I think there's so much. It's just so vast. I don't think, we could look at one little small area all day long, day after day, and we would find something new because something else
Mm.
is happening around us. So what do you want me to see?
I love that. When I view your work and especially read your blog posts, I'm touched by the way the word stillness infuses everything that you do. And I wonder if you could talk about your relationship with the experience of stillness in nature.
Yes, for me, stillness is not necessarily bodily. I mean,
Mm.
that's certainly part of it. Um, my personal nature tends to be rather energetic, and as you're probably observing, I have a hard time talking without moving. So, um, but it's also a mindset, and um, so stillness can be the idea of being present wherever it is that I am,
Mm,
and focusing on wherever it is that I am at that moment in time, and then trying to see.
mm,
And there were some words that came to me kind of over time, but it's the more you see, the more you hear, the more you hear, the more you listen, and the more you listen, the more you see.
mm,
And so it continues. And that to me is kind of that idea of stillness, because when I go out and not looking at my phone and I'm looking to see what there is to see, um, that creates a stillness within me. Um, but I may be walking, or
Yes, of
I,
course. Yes.
and
Yes.
I may be sitting,
Mm.
but I may not, and more
Yes.
likely I'm walking, or I'm walking and then I just stand there because something caught my eye or I heard something. And then it's almost like this hyper focus, but that hyper focus, though it's actually very active,
Mhm.
I'm just focusing on that one thing, and that creates that stillness for me. Yeah.
It's interesting, your wording hyper-focus, is that's really great wording, and I'm thinking about, um, our daily lives in this modern society. It seems like our daily experience is the opposite from hyper-focused. It's like
Oh,
hyper spread
absolutely.
out.
Absolutely. And when I have days where I've checked my phone too much, been on the computer too much, I mean, I go to bed and my head is
Mm.
just spinning.
Yes.
And so, um, yeah, it's a calming way, even though I would simultaneously call it exciting because I'm
Yes.
engaged, but it
Yes.
still calms my spirit.
Yeah. I love
So
the way you phrase things.
thank you.
So you send out a weekly email with a photo and a written reflection on nature, and this little email is called A Closer Look, and it ties in so beautifully with what we've been talking about details and looking, observing things that you might have passed by otherwise. And I receive this in my inbox very gratefully every week, and I love
Thank
opening it.
you.
And it reminds me to slow down and tune in. And I'd love for you to talk about this newsletter you send out.
Thank you. And I'm really thankful that that's how you respond. Um, Toward the end of 2018, and I'd been photographing pretty consistently, as in almost daily, since summer of 2014 at that point, and posting. And I just realized that people were starting to respond to the
Mm,
posts and things. And um, I just thought it might be nice to give people something to reflect on,
mm,
to see, to be encouraged to look at nature right there, because that was my own experience. And, as we've talked about, just walking in my suburban neighborhood, there's a lot
mm,
right there. And so I kind of cast it out there and asked some people, and they were like, yes,
mhm.
I'd like to receive this. My initial idea was that it would be one photo and somebody else's writing,
Okay.
like a poet, Mary Oliver, or John Muir, or any naturalist, et cetera, et cetera. And I meant to go back and look and see how long that lasted, but it might have been 2 weeks, because I found that while I absolutely love poetry, and my mom and I read poetry, I didn't have like folders of it,
Mm, mm, mm,
and
mm.
I didn't, I had some books by naturalists, but again, I didn't have folders of it, and then I didn't know about copyright laws, and I didn't want to get into asking for permission. And simultaneously, I had all these words in me
Yes.
that when I started looking at the photos or reflecting on my experience of photographing it, or sometimes just as I walked along, I would jot something down.
Mm,
And I thought, well, I guess I'll do some writing. And quite honestly, both of them felt very vulnerable, because there's like, does anybody really want to see these photos?
mm.
And who am I to put my words out there? I mean, are people really going to want to read this? But this is what I feel led to do. So
Yes.
this is what I'm going to do. And if they don't, it's okay. And maybe well, I knew I was going to learn something from it,
Mhm,
because you always
mhm.
do. But I wanted to give people something that also actually was that stillness,
Yes.
because you can go on a variety of social media, and we all put things out there. And I love learning from that. And it's photo upon photo upon photo of things that they've done. And while that is wonderful and it has its place, I wanted to give people one thing.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of how it started. And um, people would sometimes respond, and that was encouraging. And then, it's funny because when I talked about relationship with the area and the seasons and the trees, I started developing relationships with people. Some of them, the people in my neighborhood, because we too have routines and people walk their dog at the same time. And,
Yes.
but also then people I didn't know who started wanting, subscribing. And then during the pandemic, um, there is another platform. I think it's throughout the United States. I don't know if it's international, called Nextdoor. And it's a place where people can post things from their neighborhood. And unfortunately, it became a gripe place where people were just venting and complaining
Oh.
and not talking to their neighbor. They would post it, et cetera, et
Oh
cetera.
dear.
And I
Yeah.
thought, and I didn't spend much time on this thing at all, but I thought, I want to give these people I don't know something nice to look at. So I started posting a photo from the neighborhood. It wasn't a closer look because I've
Mhm.
kept that just for people who subscribe. Um, I mean, maybe 5 times I've reposted something, but um, and people in the neighborhood, when I say neighborhood, broad neighborhood, couple of
Mhm.
counties, started commenting on it and saying that that was positive. And so I thought, okay, I guess this is what I'm supposed to do. So I don't
Yes.
I don't do that one nearly as consistently. But again, it showed me that, if we put out there the beauty that we're seeing, everybody is going to respond. We do come from different frameworks and worldviews and things like that, but there is a commonality. Um, and so I started developing, a distant relationship. But again, that idea of it's a sense of place. Like I belong here and you belong here.
Mm.
And here's something that's in our neighborhood, figuratively speaking. It might be a several mile neighborhood, but um, so anyway, and then some of them started subscribing to a closer look. So it just
Mhm. Mhm.
back to a closer look. So it's very much a part of my observation because I'm taking more time to write about it and to observe it and to put it out there while at the same time trying to not make it a project.
Yes.
Because I think, there's work that we have to do. And I know I can't imagine the amount of work you have to do for a podcast, or to be sometimes maybe you feel compelled to put out nature journal types of things because that's what you do. I don't know. But if we let our own creativity and even what may have started as a release
Yes.
um, become a project, then it removes that for us. And
Yes.
I have a very good friend who says this is a project. And so it's, sometimes, yes, there's a deadline. Saturdays come every week. So I need to have it so that it can go out at the same time. But by the same token, I really try to remember, and it really hasn't taken much effort.
Mm.
I'm just putting this out there. And sometimes it's 2 or 3 words.
Mm.
Sometimes it's one word. And sometimes, like the recent one about the Carolina wren, it was a story.
Yes.
And so I have given myself the freedom of it's also just kind of like, what am I to see today? Oh, this is what I'm putting out this week. And you
Mhm.
can read it or not. But I hope you enjoy it. And if not, that's okay. I can't meet everybody's, I'm not going to meet all expectations. And I don't think anybody's putting that on me. So it's stayed very much in the enjoyable and also my own growth
Mm.
in seeing the nature around me. So it's been fun to hear people's response.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's wonderful that you've kept the right motivation. And I'm interested to hear you talk about the storytelling of it, the writing, because I well, I find your blog post and the a closer look words very much like poems. And I found myself reading your blog out loud. And I do this when I'm reading poetry. I'm compelled to read it out loud because there's something remarkable that happens when you read poetry out loud, even if it's to yourself. And I had the instinct to read your blog out loud too, because it's very poetic and very beautiful. And I wonder if you could expand on that about writing as a form of creative expression, but also nature connection. How does that come out of you? What's the process of that?
Thank you. Um, it's funny that you mentioned the saying it out loud because sometimes I kind of hear it that way.
Mhm.
And I too, when I read poetry, I will often read it out loud. And I think that also goes back to the childhood things because my
Mhm.
mother read poetry and we would even talk in rhyme, which is a different form of poetry. But
Wow.
I have journaled for a very long time. And I sometimes the act of experiencing something, I experience it I experience it more or differently or get a different perspective by putting it
Mm.
into the written word.
Mhm.
And so it kind of rounds it out for me actually. And taking the photo certainly does, but putting the words to it, it causes me to stop and I don't know if relive it is quite the thing, but process it
Yes.
and really think about it and feel it and take delight in it or take the sorrow in it, feel the sorrow in it or
Mm.
whatever it's going to be. And so I think that's kind of the why. And sometimes when I'm walking and seeing, particularly if I've just photographed something, sometimes the words just come. Like I just need to get them down right then. And it
Yes.
might be a word or something or a sentence or a phrase. Um, my head works more poetically than my speak like if we were, just having a
Mhm.
conversation. Um, Maybe that's because I like things to be pretty and nice, I don't know, but not all of my writing is pretty and nice in my journals either, so there is that, but the process in terms of a blog post or a closer look is sometimes it comes very quickly, and I'll do a little bit of editing, and sometimes, it's much slower. I give myself a few days, though. Um Generally speaking, I try to start writing on a Tuesday if I have the photo. Um, and then I'll go back and look at it the next day, and I might look at it again. And then
Mm.
I often say that I mull. I'm mulling thoughts
Yes.
and I'm mulling the photo so as I'm walking, again, it's as I'm walking, an idea will come to me and I'll think, oh no, that's more what it was. And so I'll change the writing. But honestly, sometimes it comes really quickly and there might
Mm,
be,
mm.
only a little bit of editing. And yes, there are times when it's Friday evening and Saturday is coming and I've had I might have my photo and I might have my start, but this is what it's going to be this week because
Mhm.
that's the reality of life because there are other things going
Yes.
on in life. But I do like words. I've always liked words. Um, and it is part of for me, whether it's writing my own words or reading someone else's. Um, that's very much part of the whole experience for me.
Mm, mm. I'd like to read something from your blog, if you don't mind, something that I found
No.
very beautiful. And this was a post, and you were talking about you had developed this routine of going out and photographing, and back then, 7 years ago, it helped you. And in this particular blog post, you were talking about needing that again, wanting to walk that familiar path. And you write, I needed that today. So I set out on the familiar path and grabbed my camera just in case. Like the first love rekindled, slowly, quietly, and deeply, I had the balm of re entering that place. Flowers in a neighbour's garden had an interplay with colour and texture and caught my imagination. Queen Anne's lace, its delicate blossoms now closed and held close within, gave a sense of known to my soul and a visual to my emotions. I walked and photographed, saw and felt, heard and felt heard, and was so thankful to be in that newness of that familiar path. Your writing gives me goosebumps right now.
Thank you.
I'm so I'm moved by a couple of beautiful parts to that. The first is hearing and being heard, and to me, that indicates an interrelationship, not just you as an observer looking at nature, but a relationship, a reciprocal giving and receiving from nature. And I'd love for you to talk about that.
Um, I think some of that it is relationship, and it goes with the familiarity and
Mm,
the having gotten to observe something over time and the heard and feeling heard or hearing and feeling heard. I don't remember specifically what was going on at that time when I wrote that, but more than likely I was really busy. And
mm,
that getting back to the first things that caused me to pick up the camera in the first place and hearing my own need to be out there and to just be still. And it does relate to also my relationship with God, as we talked about at
mm,
the front end. Um, but also with the Queen Anne's lace, something I've photographed that a lot. I mean, different ones, obviously. And now, over the course of time of having actually lay down on the ground and photographed them, and seeing how they can be really tight and how the
mm,
seeds are all, and that that knowing and that seeing and realizing this is what I needed today. Thank you that
mm.
this is what I got. Thank you that this was what I was given, and to have that calm again. And so I think it's really all of that, because when we lose that delight in something that was so deep within us, that can be so sad, and I just don't ever want this to become something that's it is just productive, or
Mm,
and honestly, when I stopped teaching and started doing the photography more full time and entering some shows and doing cards and things like that, I was like, but I don't want to lose that. There's the art
mm.
side, there's the being, there's the self therapy or something. There's all of that in it. And I am very thankful to say that I can have a really busy day with my work. And then my longing at the end of the day is to go out and photograph.
Mm,
And it's not to, you know, not that I have to get that photo. It's that what is there to see right now?
mm,
And it's taking it back. And so I do feel heard, because I feel like I'm being heard on what my needs are, and I'm speaking them and I'm hearing them also. But just feeling connected again.
mm, mm. Something else you say in that passage, which really I found beautiful, was the phrase newness of a familiar path. And I think sometimes when we have a routine of familiarity with something that we go to regularly, it can, within the structure of that, it can give us greater freedom. I'd love for you to talk about that too, the newness of a familiar path.
Yeah, it's something that I have found is that the more you see things, then you get an idea of what they look like, so that when something is different, you can see it
Mm,
much more quickly.
mm,
And it's almost a what's out of place. Well, it might not be out of place,
yeah.
but it's what's different. And sometimes people have asked me, "How did you see that?" And when I first started getting asked that question, I was like, "I don't know. I was just looking." But then I realized that part of that is that I have seen some of these a lot, but if you keep looking at them with fresh eyes, um, then you'll see what's different today. And and again, this is photography and nature journaling, but also in human relationships, that we would never take each other for granted, because
Yes.
we are so complex. And so, you want to always take delight in those people that are around you every day, because there's something new in them that day. And just to not take it for granted. And
Mm-mm.
so, um, yeah, there can be that fresh delight. And there is a bird here an American robin that is very, very common. They're here all year long. And yet, I mean, that was probably one of the 2 birds I could have named when I first started photographing, and I am not exaggerating. Um, and yet, though they are common and they are everywhere, when you see them as a juvenile and they have those flecks on their chest, and then you see the difference in the male and the female somewhat, and then it's just it's so common, and yet then you see it and one just reached into the soil and I photographed it and it had 5 worms in its beak. This
What?
everyday bird. I was like, "How did you do that and not drop the rest?" So it's even that. It's like, what is this very
Yeah.
common thing
Mm,
doing that's
mm,
like, "How'd you do that?
mm.
How did you build that nest? How did you?" So again, it's that really being curious and wondering and
Mm.
just not taking it for granted.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. One of the things that I found in your blog as well was this phrase about recording a moment. You were talking about photographing in your on your route, and you said it's a recording of a moment in my soul yet again. And this really struck me because it is a soul experience. And as I said, I don't have a religious faith, but I feel when I'm out in nature, boy, do I feel. And
I
just the
bet.
other day, I was outside, and you know that feeling you get when you look at your child or a loved one and you feel almost it feels almost like pain, and it's like you can't contain the feeling that's inside there, and it's like a human heart is not a big enough to contain it,
Right.
to hold what you see and what you feel, and often for me that comes out as tears because I'm so overwhelmed by my love, but I feel that for nature, and it's very much like that. I sometimes have this feeling in my heart that's like, I can't contain my feeling about the complexity of this and the beauty and the power of it, and that I get to be a part of it. I feel like
Mhm.
crying right now.
Well, me too, actually. I'm like my own heart is doing that because I'm completely resonating with what you're saying.
Yeah. And so to say recording a moment in my soul again, yet again, it just moved me so much, and I'd love for you to speak about that, about the soul of it, and that we imprint as we go through nature, as we go through the experiences, we're taking them not only onto the lens of our camera, but or onto the page of a journal, but onto the heart. And those things don't go away. Even if we forget the memory later on, those things are imprinted there. And
Mhm.
I loved that from your blog. It really, really touched me.
Thank you. Yeah, I have the exact same heart sensation. Well, I can't say exact,
Mm,
but I
mm,
have
mm,
that heart
mm.
sensation where I literally it feels like my heart is just being held and squeezed, and it's like
Yeah.
and it can be, you know, s sometimes it's that I'm already feeling something and what I'm
Mm,
seeing
mm.
captures it, but more often it's that it is that deep beauty or getting to witness something,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's through a lens, and there are certain times when there's something I got to photograph, and I'm just so excited that got to witness it, or I
Yes.
had never seen it before, and again, it might have been common, but, "Oh my gosh, look at that, this goes on all the time, and I don't
Yes.
see it." And I have a memory of, one time went to the beach, and I went with a friend, we go every year, and we had been out in the water, in Florida, and that day there were a lot of very tiny jellyfish, like a lot of tiny jellyfish, and you weren't gonna get hurt, but occasionally you get this little sting. I was like, "What's with all these jellyfish?" And that evening, we walked down to the beach, and there must have been 200 dolphins that came in, and
What?
I love dolphins. Like, I have this deep connection with there's a few animals that I have this deep connection with, and dolphins is
Mm.
among them. And we were just in awe. I have never seen anything like it, and I kept trying to photograph it. and I kept trying to photograph it. But that was one of those times, but I wasn't supposed to photograph it. None of the
Yeah.
photos, I was just supposed to experience it.
Yeah.
And then even in rethinking it, though, I mean, I can still experience it some. And the next year, we went down to the beach and there were jellyfish in the water. We thought, wouldn't it be funny? Like, does this, I mean, I've never even looked it up, but does this cause dolphins to come in? And sure enough, there was a smaller pod of dolphins. There were probably 50, but still.
That's a lot of
And
dolphins.
it's a lot of dolphins, and I did not pick up my camera, and I was like, okay, this time
Yeah.
I'm just going to
Yeah.
experience it. And do you know that not probably 15 feet, there was a mother and two babies just swam that close. I walked out into the water, and
Oh,
I will never forget it. And that is part of my heart. That is part of my
yeah.
soul. That is part of my. And so, yes, a lot of it happens when I photograph. And sometimes it happens when I draw, but
Mm,
sometimes it happens because I'm just out in it with that
mm,
expectant nature of just wanting to enjoy and wanting to see and having had to learn to take the time and the practice to see.
mm,
But
mm.
you couldn't have missed 200 dolphins. I mean, there was no missing that one.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that story, my goodness. One of your blog posts, I keep going back to your blog post. I enjoyed it so much just to read and to feel your words, but one of the blog posts talks about an unexpected snow day in Atlanta and how it suddenly made people stop and change their plans. You can't ignore it when you can't drive somewhere because there's too much snow or whatever it is. And I love that nature can shake us out of our routine. It can change the day for someone and that you can't ignore it. And I just yeah, I don't know why that touched me, but I just thought it was lovely that we go about our days, we have our routines, and we're going to work now, we're taking the kids to school or soccer practice or whatever it is, and sometimes nature says, "Hey, I'm here,
Mhm.
it's take a moment with me right now,"
Yes.
and it sounds like that day was one of those.
It definitely was. It doesn't where we live, it does not snow that often. And when it does, the city isn't it's just not common, so people don't have snow tires and there's hills and et cetera. So anyway, things tend to shut down. And and it was there you can't change it. Like nature is going to do what nature is going to do. I mean, we do unfortunately affect it in negative ways, but
Yes.
things like a snow day.
Yes.
And it was just so beautiful, and then people were out walking around in it, and
Yes.
they couldn't go to work, and kids didn't go to school, and we live not far from the interstate, from the highway, and the sound was just quiet. There were hardly any cars on the interstate, and so the the sound of the silence was so beautifully loud.
Mm,
And that I love that, and we found it during when the pandemic started and there was the
yeah.
lockdown. And for all of the very, very hard things, and I'm not undermining any of that, the simultaneous is that many people started seeing what was
Yes.
happening in nature that had been going on all along. And likewise, that interstate got quieter. So I could also hear more things, just in general. But when we're just stopped in our tracks
Mm.
because nature has said, stop. You don't have a
Yes.
choice in this matter. Um, it does cause you to look, or at least I certainly hope it
Yeah.
does.
Now we're talking, it reminds me of this experience I had. I spent some time in North England, and I was very much interested in the anthropological thing that in England, when it's raining or when it's overcast, people are very much looking down, sort of going inward and maybe feeling affected mood wise by that.
Mhm.
And then in the summertime, there was a few days when it was like bright and sunny and warm, and everybody was looking up everybody was like out talking on the street. It was like the sun had changed everybody's mood. And in that way, like nature is like, here's a sunny day.
Yes. Yes.
Let's go.
Yes. I lived in France for a year and a half, and northern France, and so the climate may have been somewhat similar. And
Yeah.
when we hit winter and it started raining, and the first days I thought, oh, this is wonderful. I can read, I can write in my journal, I can do all these
Mm.
things. And by 7 weeks, I was like, was I nuts? This is driving me crazy.
Where's the
But spring
sun?
was glorious,
Yeah.
so I had that same personal experience with it. So,
Reading your work, I'm wondering about where, well, I do this myself. I often, I find that naturally, not on purpose, but nature becomes my my psychologist in a way,
hmm hmm
and that I draw lots of metaphors from nature for my own life. And I'm wondering about that for you, whether you let nature metaphors guide you in your life.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I think being able to see the how different things depend one upon the other,
Mm.
and how, even in the autumn, though it might look like it's dead, it's a time of rest. And those
Yes.
leaves, as they're decomposing, are actually nourishing the soil. And, you know, there's a lot of it. What season is this for me? And is this a
Mm.
time when I
Mm,
might need to
mm.
be more quiet? And is this a time when, I'm having a time of growth? Um, and the fact that one plant is interrelated to another plant, and how is that as we as people, and um, how is that in my relationships, and where am I letting the weeds grow up that I probably shouldn't?
Yes.
Where
Yeah.
where is there so much going on that maybe I'm getting too busy, and we might call those weeds,
Yes.
like, are those really, and so am I really able to grow if I'm in the areas that I'm more and more trying to be attuned to the fact of this is what I'm to focus on.
Mm,
Am I
mm.
letting these other things crop in, and what might I need to kind of put some mulch over or something for a while? But no, I do. I do.
Yeah. I could sort of feel that in your writing, that and it spoke to me because I do that regularly, like taking lessons. Yeah. Nature does that. I can do that, or I can take that message and have it help me through my day, or whatever it might be.
And I know I said something about pollination just as an example earlier, but if you something I have realized is that, if that bee or that bee, and they're going to that plant and that plant,
Mm,
and they're not going to go to every plant, but they may travel hundreds of miles or something. I don't know the numbers, but still there's an area. And I have thought about that also, that the reach that you have in your drawing and your podcast, and the people that you're reaching out to, whether you are specifically doing it or they're finding you, and then each in our communities, and then learning one from another.
mm,
There's also that, again, it's the interplay.
mm.
And
I
I
love
don't
that.
have to be the most beautiful plant in the garden. I might be I can't come up with an example right now, but I might
Mm,
be that little one over here, but it has
mm,
I might be the marigold to help keep the pests off the tomatoes. I don't,
mm,
whatever it might be, but there's that play. And go ahead and live in that, and work in that. And
mm.
so, yeah, yes, I do, lots of times.
Tell me about your own nature journal practice. You mentioned art, you mentioned your friend giving you lots of supplies, and you mentioned that art has been something in your past. I'd love for you to speak about creative expression through your nature journal.
um well, for a while, for 13 years, I taught second grade, at a school that followed the Charlotte Mason philosophy, which I know you had
Wow.
somebody else on. And prior to teaching there, our kids went there.
Mhm.
And as I love education. And so when they were really, really young, I was reading about education and I was reading about Charlotte Mason philosophy. And one of the things that she did was nature journaling and how poetry could be tied into it and observation and science and having a deep sense of where you live. And so when our children, even before they went to school, we started nature journaling.
Mm.
And we kept gardens and we did it we would measure the plant growth. And so we used that for math. And then we would write descriptive words, et cetera. And then when I started teaching second grade at our school, we also did nature journaling and in several forms, sometimes being out in a garden and sometimes from when we had a series of wet and cold days, I would sometimes use one of my photos. Sometimes when we were studying the ocean, I went to a farmer's market and got a strawberry grouper and we did fish prints of it. And then I mean, all kinds of forms. And so I was doing that a lot with my students. Now, my getting to ever finish anything, because I was always doing it with kids, I didn't get to. And so the other thing I started doing when I started picking up my camera was sometimes taking time just to draw.
Mm.
And at first, I started a journal, and it was all going to be small things, not necessarily just nature. But I kept thinking about what are the small parts in life, and this tiny little part is a part of something bigger. And so I started that. And then as I started photographing more, I thought, oh, I'd like to draw that. So a lot of my own nature journaling is from photographs. Um, Sometimes, though, I will go out um, on a walk in the woods and take a nature journal and just draw. Not that much. I don't want to overplay it. Um, Sometimes I'll do like just leaves because, again, that's something it doesn't take super long. But again, you get to know it and you start
Yes.
asking about it. Um, and then often I will do it on vacation. And so occasionally it's from shells or something like that in Florida, or when we go to the mountains, I'll do quick sketches and I'll write a little bit about it. And sometimes it's that I've taken a photo and then I'm drawing from the photo. But again, then I'm looking at it and I'm getting to see a detail that there's no way. All of you that can draw things in flight, I don't know how you do it. 'Cause, so I'm taking it from a photo, but I really enjoy it because it's another form of a deeper observation.
Yes. I love that you have these different ways of expressing your connection with nature creatively. So the camera is one tool, your writing, your nature journal. It's all different forms of the same thing really, isn't it?
It is. And I think if we just like come out. And if we don't get a great photo, that's okay. And if our drawing doesn't come out, like again, it
Mhm.
goes back to what's the purpose behind it?
Yeah.
Is the purpose to produce something? And is it a project? Or is the purpose to have taken time to be in nature?
Yeah. And
And
recording
so
a moment on your soul that
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And so if I keep that, it's like, well, that drawing didn't come out, but boy, it was really nice sitting there for a
Yes.
while.
Yeah. Susanne,
Yeah.
it has been incredibly moving and very connective to talk with you. Thank you so much for taking this time to be here.
I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Susanne. I can't tell you what a rich experience it is for me to be able to have these conversations, these talks from the heart, attempting to articulate the human experience in nature, experiences of deep connection and profound feeling with people who have had similar experiences. For me, the deepest and most moving experiences in nature are those times when I have a sense of being connected, being part of this network of living things, all growing and changing and transforming together. And it's an incredible thing to realize that that we are all part of this, along with the trees and the decaying leaves, The caterpillar in its chrysalis making that miraculous transformation, the ants working together for the colony, or the stones cracking and degrading and changing through geological time. That moment of connection with nature is one of the most moving experiences of life. And along with that, the same feeling can come when we connect heart to heart and soul to soul with another person in conversations like this. I want to say thank you to Susanne for this moving talk, for her openness and warmth. And I want to say thank you to you for being here with us, taking this time to listen and to connect. We're here in this place, in this time, together, and making this connection is profound and meaningful. Thank you so much for listening. See you next week.